in the chat, and Kathleen monitoring those chat as well. At the end of the presentation, if you have a question that you forgot to ask or whatnot, I'll have my contact info as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So let me just move this down. So when we're thinking about tipped employees, we have to think about who is going to be included in the tip pool, who can be included in the tip pool. So, or who can receive a tip. So customarily, we're looking at those employees that get $30 a month in tips regularly. Okay, these are going to be your baristas, your servers, your bartenders, all of those people, all of those employees are going to be tipped employees. Okay, and we do have some examples here, but keep in mind that each employee is considered on a case-by-case basis. This is we could often see this in smaller restaurants and smaller coffee shops, things of that nature, where maybe the tips are fewer and that they don't often get tips. So it's really a case-by-case basis if it's something that isn't an automatic given, if those $30 a month aren't automatically, added kind of in the tip as in their wages. Keep in mind, while this is USDOL's version, this is our law. I know the state of Maine has a higher threshold of $185. So whenever I'm talking to you about what's in this presentation, just keep in mind that it is only going to be USDOL. I cannot speak on what the state of Maine will require. That would be, you would have to direct those questions to the state. The second question we often get is, what is a tip? A tip is money presented by a customer to an employee as a gift or gratuity in recognition of some service performed. I go out to eat for dinner. I have a server. They are taking my order. They're getting me my drinks. They're refilling water cups. They're bringing my dish out to me. At the end of the meal, I am giving them that money as a gift and saying thank you for the service that they provided. There is no amount. There's no set amount. So that tip is coming from me, and it is my discretion how much I want to tip them. Another question, and I know this was one that Kathleen had sent to me, but I had this slide, is service charges. This is one that gets really confusing. Oftentimes we'll see service charges for large parties, for banquets, catering, things of those nature. So a service charge is a compulsory charge which is added to a customer's bill, is not part of the service tip income, but rather is included with the employer's gross receipts. So normally a service charge is not going to be considered a tip, okay? If it is a set amount, you have a $200 bill, it is 20% of the bill, that is the service charge associated with it. You can add a tip on top of it. However, sometimes when we see these service charges, it's not a set amount. It will be up to the customer to decide how much they want to leave. So there are going to be instances where we have to look at a service charge and determine whether it is in fact a service charge and is going to be included in the gross receipts of the employer, or it is in fact a tip to the employee and needs to be included into their pay. Okay, so this is, again, it's going to be a case-by-case basis. It's going to be, there's all kinds of things here in the second bullet that we're looking at. We're looking at the amount added to the bill. Is optional. Is it an optional? Is it not required? Oftentimes, if you're doing catering, banquets, or have a large party, it'll say, an automatic service charge of X amount. At that point, it is not optional. That is now a service charge, okay? And then we're also looking whether the customer can exercise discretion on the amount that they want to give, given the quality of service that was provided to them. If they have some sort of discretion, then it's possible that that is no longer a service charge, but in fact a tip. If you have questions on service charges, we can definitely take them now, or if you think of them as we're going throughout the presentation, feel free to ask and we can always go back to this question. I feel like service charges are often very confusing for employers because they don't know necessarily into what category those are going to fall into.
Are auto gratuities considered part of the service charge, just under a different name, or are they completely separate categories?
So an auto gratuity is right there in the name. It's going to be an auto gratuity. That is, you're saying, like, if I go out to eat with like 8 people, I will see that it's usually how it's printed out is like the amount, and then like it'll say auto gratuity or auto tip, and then there's like a second line for an additional tip. So that right there is going to be considered the employee's tip, unless, and then anything I add on top of it.
So the sounds like the largest distinction is that auto gratuities are expected and should go directly to the employee, whereas service charges are part of income for the restaurant.
Yes, it's up to your discretion how you're going to use the service charges. If you're going to, some employers do add the service charges as the tip to the employee's pay, which is okay. At that point though, if we're coming in and looking at it, we're gonna have to just, you know, depending on the situation, we would look at it and say, yes, this is considered part of their tips, and that does cover the tip credit if they're paid on tip credit, or no, it's not. I know that we had a investigation. I know this was in New Hampshire, not Maine, but very similar thing. And it was very costly investigation, close to $1 million in tip money, because they would automatically charge the customer. They would charge the customer a gratuity, but it didn't matter like how many people were there. It was a brewery. It didn't matter how many people were there. They would just auto charge it. And because those were being auto charged, and then they could add to it because of what that was meant to cover. And it was meant to cover the tip, is what the employer told us. It was assessed to be a tip credit, or to be part of the tip money that they were supposed to be paid. So it's really going to depend on what you're using the money for. And if it's disclosed, again, like we went to, I can go back, whether or not it's discretionary. If, they put 20% auto gratuity, like I said, if I go out with a large group, it's going to be automatically, like that tip is automatically added in there. And then I understand as the customer, that is the tip. And then I can add more if I want to. Service charges are a little bit different. That is more for, like I said, like a banquet or catering event where you're adding a charge for administrative services that are added to it, if that makes sense. So it is a little bit different than a tip. Yes.
So I've seen a lot of places will have something like just a fee that they add onto their bill because of it could be an energy surcharge, or it could be just a general surcharge. But some places make it optional though, so they say that if a customer doesn't want to pay it, then they don't have to pay it. Does that discretion then automatically make it into a tip?
It depends though, like what is that necessarily paying for? Is that money that they're no longer paying going to affect the employee? Does that mean that the employee is getting less money? If it's not, then I would say that's not going to be considered part of the tip. If that money, that surcharge, was really going towards something else. Does that make sense?
So if that money were to, obviously there's no red money and blue money. So the money that you take in just all goes into your bank account. It can't necessarily, you can't say, oh, this is money for payroll and this is money for my food bill. But you see a lot of restaurants now that they'll have something called a kitchen tip or something like that, where they're providing a service charge and they're giving money to people who are not traditionally tipped employees. If that, first off, is that acceptable? And secondly, is that situation, if customers are allowed to just wave it off and say, no, we're not willing to pay that, does then it become a tip?
Okay, so the first part that you asked about the kitchen staff being in the tip pool and receiving tips, we're going to cover in just a few slides. Okay, so I'll get to that one when we get to that one, just to not confuse people. The other one, I haven't really seen where people can waive the service charges. So I guess at that point, maybe at the end, let me think about that, okay? Because I don't want to give you the wrong information. But what I'm really thinking of, when it's optional, me tipping is optional, even though it is a custom, it is expected, it is still optional, right? And I have the discretion as a customer to decide how much I'm going to leave. But you're saying in this situation that there is a set charge, but it can be waived for whatever reason. I guess the customer doesn't agree to pay it. So at that point, I guess I'm kind of asking is like, what was that supposed to be? Like I said, a lot of times, like the service charges will be like $50, $100 for whatnot, for a cleaning fee or whatnot. So that $50, was that meant to go to the employee, or was that actually meant to, and I see what you're saying is like, you're not breaking it up when you're looking at it. It's all money. It's all going into the account and then being distributed.
Right.
But, really we're looking to see like, what is that fee for?
Got it.
Because now it's like you said, a fee, a service charge, that wasn't necessarily meant for the server.
That's very helpful. Thanks for your answer.
So we're going to talk about the tip credit, and I understand that the state of Maine has a higher minimum wage, but like I said, I can only talk about USDOL. So federal minimum wage is $7.25. The max amount that you can take in a tip credit and cash wage paid that is going to be paid through tips and not from you, the employer, is $5.12. Which means that the amount you, the employer, pays when you're looking at an hourly amount for your employees is $2.13. Okay, so that is the minimum that you must pay. All right, like I said, state minimum is going to be higher, but for this, we're going to be looking just at what you can pay federally. And again, when we're looking at this, we're looking at that $5.12. Every single hour that an employee works, they must make at least $7.25 federally. So when we're looking at that, we're looking to make sure that that tip credit, that $2.13, is being paid, and then that they're being brought up with their tips to meet that $7.25. If they're not being brought up, let's say they have it's a slow day, an off day for whatever reason, and their tips, let's just say they worked 1 hour, their tips only got them to $4. So now they made $6.13. You, the employer, have to go back up and have to bring them up to $7.25. So the tips are meant to pay to help offset that. But if they don't meet minimum wage, then you, the employer, need to bring them back up. And I have had instances when I was an investigator that I saw this happen, slow weeks, slow days, whatever reason, it's winter versus summer, where servers did not meet minimum wage, and they, at that point, the tip credit was lost, and they had to be brought up to $7.25, and the employer was responsible for that, and they had back wages owed. So the employer can only claim a tip credit if the employee is informed of the tip credit allowance and amount of wage claimed as tip credit. Keep in mind, many times when this is offered, we know this as servers. We know as servers going in that this is true, but you always want to let your servers know this. In an investigation, if I go in, well, it wouldn't be me, but if an investigator goes in, they're going to be asking your employees these questions. Okay, they're going to ask them if they were informed of the tip credit and how much it was. You need to keep documents sufficient to show that sufficient tips received to bring the wage to at least minimum wage. And how is that shown? Oftentimes on payroll, we're going to see cash wage, and they'll say $2.13 or $4, whatever the cash wage is, times the hours that they work, and then underneath it, it'll show tip. And that is fine. We just need to see how much they're bringing in tips to make sure that when we're going through our records, that everyone is being paid at least minimum wage. And the tips retained by the employee, not shared with the employer or other employees, except in a valid tip pooling arrangement. Okay, the tips are the property of the server. Okay, so they are not. That is not money that is owed to the employer or to the manager. It is only for the server that earned those tips. So again, going through this, you want to let your employees know that there is a tip credit allowance and how much tip credit there is. Okay, because those are the questions we're going to be asking if we go in. We're going to want to make sure that the employees were aware of how the pay structure was.
May I ask a quick question on that?
Yes.
Is the employee hitting the threshold of the tip credit, is that on a daily basis or is it on a weekly paycheck?
It's on a weekly basis.
Okay.
So in any given week, we would just make sure that however much they made hourly plus their tips divided by hours worked in that week is at least $7.25, because that's often true. They could have we live in Maine. It's beautiful right now. People are going to go out to eat, but tomorrow it could be raining and stormy and people don't want to go sit on a beautiful deck in the rain. So, today they could get a great amount in tips and tomorrow could be very slow. So we look at it throughout the whole week to kind of balance it out.
Thank you.
So tip pools. I know there was a gentleman that had asked who can be in the tip pool, and we're gonna get into that now. So the first kind of tip pool that we have is where the employer pays not less than $2.13 per hour in cash wage and counts tips as part of the minimum wage. So they are in this situation, they are using a tip credit, okay? Only tipped employees in occupations that customarily and regularly receive tips, so we're going back to the bartenders, the hostesses, the servers, we're going back to those folks, can be in the tip pool. There can be no back of the house employees or other non-tipped employees in this pool, no managers or supervisors in the tip pool, okay? And that is going to be true for both of these tip pool examples that we have. The employers, managers, and supervisors may never keep employees' tips and can never be in the tip pool, okay? And I'll go through that in a little bit because there's one small caveat to that, okay? So if you have only tip credit employees in the front of the house, this is the type of tip pool you're looking at. Only those front of the house employees that are customarily and regularly receive tips can be in that tip pool. If you don't have that situation, the front of the house is paid full minimum wage at $7.25 per hour plus tips, then all employees, including back of the house and those in non-tip positions, may be in the tip pool. Your chefs, your dishwashers, they can be now in that tip pool. Again, though, the managers and supervisors cannot be in the tip pool. Okay, so that would be the same in both of these instances. The only time a manager, supervisor, employer can actually receive a tip is if they were to serve the customer solely and directly. Your bartender calls out, so you go ahead and you man the bar. The people sitting at the bar are the ones that you are directly serving, and they're going to tip you. Your servers come by and you're also making drinks for their tables, you would not get a part of their tip. Even if they tip, they usually tip out the bartender, okay? Because again, only the ones that you are directly serving. Another one would be you get really busy, you open up an extra section of your restaurant and you say, I will serve these 4 tables. For those 4 tables that you serve, they're going to be tipping you directly. You can keep those tips. Now, you can't be in a tip pool, but there's nothing that precludes you from putting into the tip pool. You just can't take out. So that's a small caveat, is you can put in, you just can't take out. Any questions about employers, managers, and supervisors being in the tip pool, or any questions on these 2 tip pools?
I do have one question. I'm in a situation where it's an inn, so it's not a restaurant. It's
Okay,
a bed and breakfast.
Mhm.
And we do get tips that are left by guests on their room bill when they check out via credit card or just cash.
Okay.
Nobody's on minimum wage, but the managers or the supervisors are serving the guests in the morning. We have a complimentary breakfast, so they serve them. And also we do happy hours, so the manager or supervisor are helping with that as well. Can they be
Okay.
included in that circumstance?
So in the mornings when they're serving the customers, are they the only ones there, or do you have like a dedicated serving staff?
I have one serving staff and a manager
Okay.
serving. So they're
So-
part of the serving crew.
Yeah, so if the manager isn't serving alone, let's say today that other person and the manager are there, because the manager is not working alone, the manager cannot take part of the tips. Okay.
Mhm.
If that person were to call out and then the manager has to serve everyone alone, at that point they can. Okay. It may
Can I have
be-
a clarification on that? Is that situation because they're not waiting on individual tables and so they're sharing the work?
Exactly.
So
There's
if.
no
if
way to
But they are.
differentiate, there's no way to differentiate who that tip is for. But the law clearly states that managers, supervisors, employers cannot keep employees' tips.
So if in that circumstance that he's talking about, the manager took 5 tables and presented a check to those 5 tables and they paid and tipped, and the other person took 5 tables and presented a check and they tipped, then each person could keep the tips that they got on those tables.
Correct.
Well,
And that's exactly what I was going to suggest, is if you're running into a situation where you're not sure who the money's for, if it's for housekeeping, for the happy hour, you may, and again, I know this would probably be a lot of work given your current setup, you may need to set up a way in which people could tip for those individual things.
Well, let me clarify. The breakfast is not charged. There is no bills presented to anybody. It's a complimentary breakfast service. It's all
Right.
included in the rate, so there's no exchange of money. The tips are just left by the guest for the inn for the
Exactly.
staff in general.
Right. So
And
it's like when I went on vacation, all inclusive resort, I had breakfast, I left the money there, and that is meant for the server who took care of me. Oftentimes I would hand it directly to them just because I don't know if they would actually get the money. So again, are they sharing tables and they're sharing the work, or is it
Yes.
you take those 5 tables, I'll take these 5
Oh,
tables?
no, they're sharing, they're cross-sharing. You take the orders, you bust the table, you clean it, you do,
Yeah.
they're sharing. They're both co-working the room.
Yeah, so at
equally.
that point, because they're sharing the work, only the non-managing employee would get the tips.
Okay.
And it may be that you and I can talk offline a little bit about what that manager is doing and just really look into the duties of what they're doing too, okay?
Okay.
Because that's
I
going to
have-
be another question. I do see that there is a question or something in the chat. Oh, please go back to tip pools #1 slide. Let me go right back real quick.
Yeah, and I have a question too, when you have it.
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, so I think I heard you said, but I wanted to confirm this, that if the business does not use the tip credit, so pays everyone a full wage,
Mhm.
then anyone can be put into the tip pool at the owner's discretion or the manager's
Correct.
discretion,
Correct.
including-
Except, go ahead.
including not traditionally tipped people.
Correct. So at that point, I'm gonna go off of tip pool 1 now. At that point, if you are paying everyone full minimum wage up front, then traditionally non-tipped employees, dishwashers, cooks, sous chefs, whatever it may be, can now be included in the tip pool.
And how about the manager?
Managers can never be in the tip pool unless they are solely doing the work.
So, but in that case, if you're paying the full minimum wage and you have, say, a server manager who's waiting on their own tables, they can take the tips that they earn directly and they can add into the tip pool or tip out a host or a bartender or a busboy.
Correct.
But
So they
can't
can add
take
into
the
a tip
back.
pool, but they can't pull out. Correct. So at that
Okay.
point, if it's someone who is managing and they have some tables, my recommendation would be to either put in an X amount into the tip pool that will go back out to the hostesses, busboys, bartenders, whatever it may be, or to tip them out individually, 2%, whatever the customary amount that you recognize in your establishment.
Okay, so
Some
let's
establishments have set amounts.
so let me just sorry to keep throwing these scenarios at you. So in a case where a restaurant or a food serving establishment, a restaurant inside a hotel, is in fact taking advantage of the tip credit, and there is a tip pool, but a manager is working and taking their own tables and collecting their own tips, can the manager stand there and say, okay, how much did you guys earn in your tip pool? And they say, oh, we're all making $100. And then at that point, that manager could then put money into the tip pool to even up if we wanted him to do that.
So there's nothing in our laws that precludes employees from talking about how much they make. There's nothing that will stop that. You can't necessarily make it mandatory. That would
Right.
be the only thing I'd be a little cautious about. But you can definitely,
and in that scenario, the manager could not then have that pool. Let's say that they made more than the manager did, then the pool could not give money to the manager.
right. Let's say there's 4 servers, they all made $100 and the manager only made 70. He or she can't take money out of that pool to kind of even it up at that point. Correct.
Okay, I understand. Thank you for answering that question.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
No worries. Any other questions before we move on?
Yeah, thank you. Can you go back to tip pool #1?
Yep.
Which is where I am because we use the tip credit.
Okay.
So my question is for a bartender that has supervisory duties in another area of the restaurant, like our food truck.
Okay.
Our food truck.
So I am not sure if I put this slide in, but I'm going to go over quickly what we're going to look at when we're talking about managers and supervisors, because you could have someone who has some supervisory duties, but doesn't necessarily meet the criteria to be a manager under what we're talking about in this instance, okay?
Is this what you're calling the duties test?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
very good. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna go to this one right here. And we can go back if we need to, but this one is going to go over all this. So when we're looking at tipped employees under the FLSA for managers and supervisors, we're looking at those whose duty is to primarily manage the enterprise or a department, but in this instance, it's probably going to be either the front or back of the house, and who customarily and regularly direct the work of at least two or more other full-time employees or their equivalent. So when we're looking at two or more other full-time employees or their equivalent, it could be 4 part-time employees that work 20 hours each. And so, you know, they're equaling the 80 hours that we would normally see in 2 full-time employees. The third thing, so they need to meet all of these. The third thing is those who have the authority to hire or fire other employee, or whose suggestion and recommendations as to the hiring or firing are given particular weight. If you as the employer go and ask your manager, hey, how is Joe doing? Is he catching on? Does he seem to be getting the duties? And you're like, yep, Joe's great. We're glad to have him on the team. He stays hired. We're gonna say that that is given particular weight to him staying on. Or if they were, you know, you show them a resume or say, hey, look at the, you know, this gentleman or this lady's answers to our questions, and they say, yeah, it sounds like they would fit that role great, then you're hiring them. On the other hand, you could say, no, they don't seem like a good fit, or no, Joe's not really picking up the duties, and they get fired. All right, we're looking at those types of things. Keep in mind too, though, not only is it the hiring and firing, but if someone calls out, who are the employees calling? If there's an issue, who are they calling in the middle of the night or at 9 p.m. at night? Who's doing the evaluations, who's doing the scheduling? So all of those kind of questions fall into play, because those would be the roles of a manager and or supervisor, okay? We're also looking at business owners who own at least 20% equity interest in the enterprise and that are employed and who are actively engaged in its management. They're automatically going to be included in this manager supervisor role, even if they are the employer who owns part of the business, okay? Hopefully this answers some of your questions, but I'm thinking that we may have some questions that people have.
Excuse me, Anna,
Yes.
will you have access to these slides?
Yes, I can make them available to you.
Thank you.
Anna, I've got one question on front of house tip pooling, where you might have a couple tip credited servers and
Okay.
a non-tip credited host who's making maybe, you know, $15 or $18 an hour, let's say.
Mhm.
Is it still okay for the host to be part of the tip pool?
Yes. Yes, because hostesses are generally considered to be tipped employees. They're often tipped out by the servers. So
Okay.
yes, they can receive
And
tips.
like a bar back, so any front of house,
Yeah.
even though they're making minimum more than minimum wage.
What we're
Okay.
looking at is whether all the front of the house is making that full minimum wage, or if some of them, and generally when I say some of them, is you're not going to have some servers who make full minimum wage and some that make tip credit. It's usually groups of employees. You know, the servers will make X amount, the bartenders will make X amount. Sometimes, you know, someone may make a little bit more in cash wage simply because of experience, but you're still taking a tip credit for them.
And if you have a bartender and a server who tip pool, and the bartender's making more than minimum wage and the server's making tipped credit, they can still tip pool.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
And
Any other? Yes.
right, there is a question in the chat about tip pools #2 slide.
On slide 2. So this law has been in effect, I believe, since about 2018. So this is not anything new. And I believe in 2021, more guidance came out on this. So this is not anything new that has come out, but we still see a lot of a lot of employers still falling into violation because of this.
Thanks. And do they adhere to state minimum or federal wage?
I'm sorry?
There's a follow-up question about adhering to state minimum.
Okay. So you need to follow the stricter of the two, whichever would benefit the employee more. So in this situation, you want to, because we are in the state of Maine, you want to follow the state of Maine's minimum wage.
Thanks.
Welcome. So we're going to talk. Yep.
Sorry, back on the last slide. You said that the person we're talking about, supervisor manager, has to qualify in all three of 1, 2, and 3 on that slide, correct?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. And even though we're not talking about this for exemption purposes, this would be the same for anyone who is going to be exempt under the executive exemption. And you can find more information if you type in fact sheet 15 wage and hour division. This will come right up for you, but these slides will be made available.
Can I ask a follow-up question on the first point on the duties test is managing the enterprise, which seems to me to be a very easy thing to run afoul of. Can you give us some examples of what managing the enterprise would be?
Right. So number one is kind of going to be, you know, when you look at, I'm trying to think for a restaurant or a hotel, because I know that there are some people who are in, you know, businesses of inns and hotels. It's going to be whoever's kind of managing that, who is running it. Okay. So in this situation for a restaurant, you're going to have someone who you could have one person who is the employer, let's say, who owns the business, right? They own the entire business, but then they also have a front of the house manager and a back of the house manager, and they're managing their areas, right? So managing in itself, I don't know that we have an actual definition, but it's kind of going to go back to that same thing of who are they calling, who are employees calling if they have to call out, or if there's an issue, or, you know, who's doing the evaluation. So when we think of managing the enterprise, it could be one person who is managing the whole business, but oftentimes there's going to be multiple people under that.
You're fine. Hey.
Thinking it's a dog.
Yeah, I think so too. Could be a child.
Someone needs to mute.
So does that answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah, I gotta say,
your question.
This one is a little confusing to me only because managing the enterprise sounds like a pretty big role. So you could have a dining room manager who maybe writes the schedule, who maybe evaluates people when they're doing a tryout to see if they're going to fit in as a host or a server or a bartender, who you may take their opinion very seriously about if someone's going to remain on your staff or not. But they have absolutely nothing to do with looking at financials. They don't have anything to do with your strategic planning or marketing or you know, choosing the hours of operation of the business or what the menus are going to look like or anything like that. So it does seem like it's an area where there could, I mean, where all three of these things need to be met. Seems like you could maybe the Department of Labor and the business owner might have a pretty easy place for disagreement on that.
The second part of that is or a customarily recognized department or subdivision of the enterprise. So if you have a dining room supervisor, and that's their department subdivision. They're not looking at if it's like a hotel too, they're not looking at the hotel portion of that. They're just in charge of their department, which is the dining room.
Right. And this is probably where people would run afoul because it's very unlikely that your CFO is going to be down there bussing and serving tables, but it's pretty likely that your dining room supervisor is in fact going to be waiting on tables.
Correct.
Got it.
I would agree with that statement. Yes.
Thanks for the answer. I appreciate it.
Yep. Okay, so this is something new. Dual jobs was recently changed. I want to say maybe a year ago as to when an employer can take a tip credit. Okay, so this is some new information. It was kind of clarified in new legislation or new laws that were passed. So in a dual job, that's when an employee works for the same employer in a tipped occupation and a non-tipped occupation. Maybe they are a server, but they also clean rooms, or they're a janitor or whatnot. Okay, so one is tipped, one isn't. You as the employer can take a tip credit against minimum wage obligation only for the time the employee spends in a tipped occupation. Okay. When an employee is engaged in non-tipped occupation, the employee must be paid not less than a direct wage equal to the full minimum wage, so $725 or more, and wage for the work performed in the non-tipped occupation. Okay, so you could have two different wages that they're paid. The change that came out was that we recognize that tipped employees sometimes have related duties that are not themselves directed toward producing tips. We all know if we go to the table, we write down someone's order, we bring them their food, those are the duties that we recognize as being producing tips. But there's a little bit more to that. There's cleaning and setting tables, making coffee, wrapping silverware. Because those duties are related to the production of tips indirectly, even if so, they are going to be in that occupation. They're going to be considered in their tipped occupation. So a tipped employee is still engaged in their tipped occupation when they perform non-tipped duties that are related to their tipped occupation occasionally or for part of the time. The old guidance, there was very strict rules, no more than 30 minutes, no more than, I believe it was like 20% in a week. Now we're recognizing that someone who is in a role of serving or bartending, maybe wrapping silverware, maybe cutting limes for drinks, that those things are going to affect their tips. What is not going to be affecting their tips is them potentially cleaning the bathroom. If you have someone like a whole different group doing that, that is not necessarily going to be related to their duties to producing a tip. Okay, so that's the biggest change that happened for the dual jobs guidance, is understanding that there are things, like I said, cleaning and setting up tables, wrapping silverware, making coffee, cutting limes, things like that, that may be related, that are related to their jobs in a tipped occupation. Okay, any questions about that? So the prompt distribution of tips. Tips need to be paid out no later than the regular payday for the work week in which tips were collected, or no later than the regular payday if the pay period covers more than a single work week, or as soon as practicable after the regular payday if the employer is unable to ascertain the amount of tips that have been received or how tips should be distributed prior to processing payroll. If you pay your tips on the same day they are earned, that is fine. You just want to make sure that you're able to tally those tips. So at the end of the pay period, you know how much was paid out to them in tips. Again, that is going to be to ensure that they're paid at least $7.25. Any questions on this? So we do have some online resources that are available to you, worker.gov, employer.gov. If you aren't able to find anything there, I highly recommend our eLaws. We have a wonderful overtime calculator. If you ever have any questions on overtime, this is not what this presentation is on, but I know that is often a question people have regarding overtime if people are working in multiple jobs with multiple rates of pay. And alternatively, you can always call us at 1-866-4-US-WAGE. They will ask for you to put in your zip code, and then you will be transferred into the northern region, northeast region, to someone to talk to, or you can reach out to me directly at my phone number or email. Any questions? I will stop sharing my screen. Does people have anything they want to ask?
Actually, Anna, I'll ask one more question. There was initially a little while back, there was someone asking about a kind of a voluntary but auto indicated charge on a receipt for a back of house distribution of fees. So let's say they charge a 10% or a 15% kitchen bonus on the, or gratuity on the check, that is not the tip that the guests can voluntarily add for the server. But it's like a service charge, but it gets distributed to all the back of house. And it still could be voluntary. The guest could ask for that to be removed if they didn't like it. Most of them may not see it. Is that still able to be? Because a lot of restaurants I've seen offer that, and we've been considering something like that to pay extra for the back of the house.
Yeah, so I won't lie, I've seen it too when I go out to eat. I see it on the menu. They're like, please consider leaving a tip for the kitchen. Again, because the servers are likely going to be tip credit, there's no tips that can really go out to the kitchen necessarily. You had mentioned kind of like a bonus. A bonus would be a different situation if that's a bonus. And then that has to be included into a regular rate, and overtime has to be, if they work overtime, you have to calculate that. And that's where it gets a little tricky because it is optional, but because if the servers are being paid tip with the tip credit, the back of the house is almost automatically excluded from tips being received. The only time that would be a little bit different is I see this for restaurants. Oftentimes the cooks or whatnot will take the to-go orders. They'll take the call, prep the food, bag it, and then give it to the customer, and the customer tips them. That's the only time that that's a little bit different because they're the ones performing the actual work for the customer. There are some setups that I've seen where that happens.
So adding this automatic fee, a percentage of the bill onto the tab for back of house is not allowed.
No, because it's going to be considered a tip in the back of the house, unless, of course, your servers are they being paid full minimum wage or with tip credit?
They would in this situation. I'm assuming they would get tip credit because they're a normal server, and they would be tipped separately by the guest, I'm guessing, for their service.
Yeah. So that is a little tricky then, because you're calling it a fee and not a gratuity, and it's going to a specific people in the back of the house, I'm guessing, that worked that night.
So can I ask a question? It would seem to me that one of the things that was really vital to that process is that if you're charging a room charge, for example, that's taxable income to the restaurant, where obviously a tip or a gratuity is not. And so if you're
it's going to be taxable to the employee.
Let's just say that we call the fee the left-handed people fee, and we charge 5% for that. And so for every $100, we charge $5, and we pay tax on that. We call that income. And then we can just put that $5 for left-handed people fee into our general fund, and we can pay whoever we want with it.
At that point, I'm not going to tell you how you pay your people from what pot of money. Correct. I'm saying that money that is left from the customer to the server is the property of the server. I'm not, I can't, if we go in and we ask your employees.
Let me clarify. And I think that this is getting to what the other person was questioning. So you have a service fee that goes onto your bill. You also have people leaving a gratuity. So, your bill was $100. There's a $5 service fee, and we're going to call it the left-handed person fee because it's ridiculous, right? So now we have $105 of income going to the restaurant, and then someone leaves a $20 tip. The tip obviously then goes to the normally tipped people or into their tip pool, but that $5 left-handed person fee, you could give $1 to your janitor, $1 to your cook, $1 to your dishwasher, $1 to your parking attendant.
Correct. But then if I come in and I do an investigation and I'm talking to your parking attendant, your janitor, and say, how much do you make? Are you getting any tips? And they turn around and say, yes. At this point, now I'm going back and saying, what is this money coming from? What is this, what is this extra money? Is it a tip? Is it a bonus? You see how that gets, if you're going to pay them more, then maybe you say for a event that they have a higher rate of pay. They're not getting tip. They're just getting a higher rate for an event.
Right,
That is
so I'm,
really to
what
kind
I'm,
of
what I'm
circumvent
hearing
that.
you say is if I was paying my cook $20 an hour and I've decided by virtue of me bringing in this extra 5%, I'm now gonna pay him $22 an hour, then it's just his hourly wage and it doesn't really matter that I got it as a service fee that I paid tax on.
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
thanks
Yeah,
for
what
that.
we want to make sure is that they're not getting tipped for,
Right.
you know, because they can't be at that point. They're not tipped employees.
And sorry to the other person who was asking that question. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you clarified it well, David. Thanks.
And I see that Lawrence has a question. Correct. So if all employees are paid at least minimum wage, no tip credit involved, then you can pull tips and include the back of the house employees. That is correct. Yes. Any other questions?
Anna, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much for sharing.
Of course. And if you have anyone has questions, feel free to reach out after. I know that we are here to help you. We want to get ahead of the problem before it is a problem, before an investigation happens, so that if we do happen to come in or for whatever reason, you know, we're not having this conversation with you, you know, looking at back wages being owed.
Yeah, great job, Anna. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
Take care.